Good afternoon, my darling turtle ducks. You're just in time for tea. Please have a seat. It's a little chilly today, so I've prepared some hot chocolate, and we still have cookies, of course. I thought today we might talk a little about introductions. I don't know about you, but it seems like the rules of introductions are very oblique and can lead to confusion and awkward situations if anyone is nervous or anxious. I'll be summarizing and modernizing information a bit, but you can find the bones in Emily Post's Blue Book of Etiquette. Let's start with who goes first. There are four categories to keep in mind when beginning introductions, identified as feminine, non-binary, masculine, and age, oldest to youngest. This is the order that you want to introduce people in as well. The biggest caveat here is that you always introduce a feminine person to a masculine person. For example, my mother is coming with me to a party where she knows very few people, and I must introduce her. We come upon one of my friends, a masculine identified gentleperson, who is indeed younger than her. To do a proper introduction, I would address my mother first, but introduce her second. Mother, may I introduce Mr. X? Mr. X, this is my mother, Mrs. B. This is the formula to be used every time, with the most feminine being introduced to the most masculine, oldest to youngest. Between two non-binary individuals, if they are the same level of androgynous, introduce the oldest to the youngest. If they are the same age, introduce the one you have known longer first. It is important to distinguish between the appropriate times to utilize formal and informal introductions. You should always use formal introductions in any situation that might be considered professional or where you would want to keep professional and personal separate. Meetings, dinners, or events predominantly involving business or school, and formally produced theatrical productions should be considered a place of formal introduction. If you would consider the dress code business casual or stricter, you should use a formal introduction. Casual parties hosted by yourself or peers, casual dinners, nights out, or simply traveling during the day are all perfectly acceptable times for casual introductions. Regardless of the formality, if you are the joining factor between two or more parties who do not know each other, please take it upon yourself to offer introductions. The following formula is the most common. X, this is my relationship, Y. Y, this is my relationship, X. After which point, both parties should greet one another. It is very common and perfectly acceptable to repeat a person's name after the first introduction, or to ask them to repeat it if you are either unsure what it was or it helps you commit the name to memory. The most common times you are likely to need to introduce two parties is when you are having a large gathering of people who may or may not be acquainted, when encountering friends and coworkers while out and about, and dinners to which you bring a guest. It is important to introduce your guest as often as possible if they are not already familiar with the other parties. We don't always know how others wish to introduce us, particularly if we fill multiple relationship roles in their lives. You may think it's fine to let your friends introduce themselves, but this can put social strain on those who are not familiar with the level of formality they should be using. Once introductions have been made, all parties may settle into the relationship role appropriate for the encounter. If you have been invited somewhere for the first time and need to introduce yourself, simply keep in mind the level of formality and detail required. Simple introductions in a classroom setting need not be as grandiose or involved as introductions in a professional or business setting. Unless the situation dictates otherwise, it is always advisable to introduce yourself with your preferred name. This can be particularly helpful for those who find memorizing names difficult. If it is appropriate, please include relevant pronouns and applicable suffix and prefix. If someone is being introduced to you, it is important to respond correctly. If you have any seniority or authority over them, you can set the level of formality. If they begin with a formal greeting, you have the ability to make it more informal. Equally, you can encourage them back to a higher level of formality if you believe they were being too informal. This can be achieved easily by use of "you may call me" and either use your formal title or a more informal manner of address. While physical contact is not strictly necessary for polite introductions, it is usually expected. Particularly in the United States, it is expected that a handshake be given for most first meetings and regularly after, unless cleanliness, injury, or illness prevents it. As I personally do not like handshakes or most physical contact, I have found that this can be circumvented if you bow slightly upon introduction, not allowing the other person to reach out their hand first. This can be seen as making the introduction more formal, but is rarely viewed as rude. Regarding introductions with femmes, it is no longer common to kiss the hand of a femme. In my opinion, however, a kiss to a gloved hand is far more pleasant than a rough handshake. Please keep in mind that the more masculine party should be doing the kissing, while the more feminine party should receive. Do not kiss bare skin, as this is rude if you are not romantically entwined. There are some cases in which introductions are not necessary. It may seem redundant, but you do not need to make introductions if the parties are already familiar with one another. However, you also do not need to concern yourself with introductions if the event is either too large or too extensive for introductions to every guest to be practical, or where such introductions may be thought callous, such as a funeral. When greeting somebody older or holding more authority than you, either in the place of business or relationship status, you should default to being formal. It sets a good precedent and offers the slight buffer of etiquette in your favor. Additionally, it is important to introduce the oldest, most feminine person first. Thus, the greatest, grandest grandmother should be introduced first, then following the rules of the next oldest feminine to the youngest, most masculine. All adults should be introduced before children, and family units should be introduced together. Spice may be introduced together. This is Mr. and Mr. X, followed by their children in descending order. Oh dear, I've forgotten your name. It happens to all of us. We've gone to introduce someone and, oh dear, we've forgotten their name. This can feel quite embarrassing when it happens, particularly if you had just spoken or heard the name that was forgotten. In these cases, try to introduce the person whose name you remember first and introduce the other person by relation. If they realize what has happened, they will surely supply the name themselves. If not, you may simply have to fess up and ask for their name again. Now, what if someone has forgotten your name? Please take pity on them and supply it as soon as the opportunity arises, and do not be too cross with them. We all forget names from time to time, and better to wait for it to be supplied than to assign one at random, or worse, one no longer used. But do try not to make it too obvious that they have outright forgotten your name. Simply give it and brush past as though it didn't happen. No one forgets a name on purpose in such a manner. The last bit of importance are honorifics. Dr., Mr., Mrs., Mix, and others. Honorifics can usually be dropped in casual introductions unless it is in relation to an important life event. Someone just achieved their PhD or MD. Someone was recently married, in which a playful lilt is usually added to insinuate that the honorific is new and a pleasant topic of conversation. For formal introductions, honorifics should always be used. They provide an excellent, socially established manner to indicate the appropriate pronouns to be used or the expertise of a given individual in the case of a doctor or master. If you have non-binary friends, co-workers, or family members, attempt to establish an appropriate honorific for them in advance of the introduction, as well as potential explanation. If you are using mix and they ask what it is, you can tell them that it is a non-gendered formal honorific. If pronouns are shifting, make sure you are aware of the correct honorific for a given event. If you yourself are non-binary or gender fluid, please consider looking into what honorifics you would like used for formal introductions. Well, that's about all the time I have for tea. I'd better get back to work. Thank you for joining me, and remember, my turtle ducks, be kind to others and to yourselves. I'll see you again next time.